How are you guys? We're going to talk about intention in a second, but before we do, a wise person once said, people don't begin learning until they hear their own voice. So what I'd like you to do right now is we're going to have 3 one-minute conversations, but I'm going to give you the questions one at a time. So what I want you to do is, if you're not standing, there's folks standing, I want you to stand up, find a partner, preferably somebody not sitting directly beside you, so maybe turn to the row behind you. Stand up, find a partner, and I'm going to give you 3 questions, 1 minute at a time. All right, find a partner. That's great. All right, here we go, 1 at a time. Introduce yourself. First question. These are going to be 60 seconds long, and then I'm going to tell you when the time's up, I'm going to say next. So think of your answer, share it. Here's the first question. Name the most energizing thing you've done in the last 30 days. Name the most appropriate energizing thing you've done in the last 30 days. Go. Ten seconds. 10. All right, bring it in for a landing. Here we go. Next question. We're going to shift quick. Next question. Name the most intentional person you know. Name the most intentional person you know. Go ahead. And we are good. Last question. Here we go. When you're done with this one, I want you to find your seat when you're finished. So last question. When you come up with an answer, you can sit down. Here we go. Last question. Name the one thing you do better than anyone else you know. Not in the whole world. Your circle of friends, not dead people. Name the one thing you do better than anyone else you know. And when you're done, you can go ahead and find your seat. All right. So, my name is Mike Dauphinee. My name is Mike Dauphinee, and San Diego, I'm one of the few people actually born in San Diego. You know, anybody else born in San Diego here? That's right. One of the few. Actually grew up on the East Coast, but I actually live on the road pretty much right now, but I spend about 20 to 25 days a month traveling the world, speaking, consulting, coaching. I had a client once say to me, a friend actually, say, well, what exactly do you do? And I'm like, well, I help people understand their strengths. He's like, that's crap. And he's like, I said, well, I help them understand the talent in their teams so they can align better. And when critical moments come up, he's like, that's business garbage too. And finally, in frustration, I said, you know what my clients pay me for? They pay me so they can call at 3 a.m. and hear me say, you're not alone, I see you, and I'm not scared, right? And so basically, I spend my time helping leaders solve their greatest problems. It's kind of what I do for a living. Nate gave you a little bit of my story, but to kind of give you a back piece and then a middle, and then we'll kind of dive in. I spent 6 years working for Hewlett Packard, first up in the Bay Area in Palo Alto, and then Rancho Bernardo. I loved what I did. I was good at it. I worked in international law as a negotiator and some things like that. I had worked in drug rehab before that for convicted juvenile felons in the Bay Area, and my student loans came calling. And so somehow, I went from working as basically a dad in a drug rehab to working for HP. And after, student loans are powerful, right? They're a powerful beast. And they built so much anxiety that before I know it, I was working hard, but I had no intention of working for HP. And one day, Bernardo Center Drive on Highway 15, I pulled off the off-ramp and caught a glimpse of my face in the mirror, this is no lie, and burst into tears. I remember looking at the mirror and thinking, whose face is that? Like, I was 315 pounds at the time. I was an insomniac. I wasn't sleeping. I was living in Coronado, 2 blocks from the beach. I had a great job. I was reporting 5 from the top of HP. Everything I'm supposed to want, I'm supposed to have. But I remember thinking, who is that person? And is this his life? And if it's not my life, whose life is it, and how did I get here? I walked away from HP, and before I know it, started my own business within a year later. StrengthsFinder. Anybody heard of the Clifton StrengthsFinder in here? The Clifton StrengthsFinder is a tool that I'm kind of known for. I use a lot. It had just come out. I encountered it, and it kind of helped me put vocabulary to things I was thinking and feeling. And the reality of the situation is, oh, sorry, guys. Meant to hit the wrong button there. The reality of the situation was that I was living someone else's life, and I didn't know whose life it was, but the Clifton StrengthsFinder gave me vocabulary in a new way. And so I started working with nonprofits and speaking, and one thing led to another, and before I knew it, somebody said one day, do you do consulting? And I'm like, what does that mean? And I'm like, I don't know what that is. I do StrengthsFinder workshops. One thing led to another, and before I knew it, one client led to another. An inner city nonprofit in Detroit led to United Way, which led to Chrysler Jeep Grand Cherokee, which led to Detroit, the Detroit Lions, which led to Shinola, which led to. And so I spent years working with corporations and small businesses, helping them understand their strengths. But then I realized that a large portion of what happens is that people in developing nations don't get access to these kind of tools. What would it look like to take the concept of strengths and living intentionally to fragile and conflict-affected environments? So I spend about 40% of my time currently in Afghanistan. I'm there every 5 weeks doing change management in what's called governance, security, and justice. You're gonna hear some of that, but I was in Afghanistan about 3 weeks ago, and one of my clients works at the palace, and President Ghani had just called a meeting of his advisors to deal with an issue. This is right before Eid, and he said as they were going around, in Afghanistan, if you've ever been to Central Asia, in Afghanistan, when you're called on to speak in a meeting, you give your title, you thank every person in the room. You show great honor. It's an honor culture where it really, truly matters. There was an issue came up, and President Ghani, he was actually educated in the U.S. I went to grad school over here, and so he has a different way of thinking sometimes. In this meeting, he went and had an issue, and he said, I would like to hear from the ambassador from, let's say, Nuristan province. So the ambassador stood up and said, thank you, President Ghani, in the name of Allah and his holy prophet, and he kind of went through, and he said, thank you for being here, and he thanked the executive officer, and he thanked the vice presidents, and he thanked the governors, and he had 5 minutes of thanking, no lie. And as he rounded the last person and got back around of his thank yous, he looked at the president and said, but unfortunately, sir, I'm not the governor from Nuristan. And the president lost his mind. He was like, no, answer the question. Answer the question. See, we do that though, right? We can get in the habit of just going through the motions on things. You can do what's always been done because it's expected at your job. You come in with different ideas and maybe you work someplace and you're like, how did I become one of them? How did this happen? See, intention. What is actual intention? And I want to talk about intention, but I want to talk about it in a little bit of a different way. I'm using the word intentional, right? Intentional is going to be, it's an action performed with awareness that's done deliberately, consciously, on purpose. Are you living on purpose? Because the thing I find is that too many people, they stumble into success and hope to keep stumbling, right? They hope they found it, they stumble in, something works, it's exciting, they don't know what it is, and they're like, but that was genius, how do I stumble into that again? I want to give you 3 beats of something that I think can impact your life if you're an independent consultant, if you're a small business owner, if you're the director of something, if you're an employee, if you're a mom, if you're a dad, I don't care. You can transform your life by being intentional about 3 areas. And those 3 areas are going to be strengths, sacrifice, and generosity, okay? I want to give you a couple beats on each one of these. What's interesting, though, is that it starts with strengths. How was that last question for you? Did anybody have trouble with the third question? Name the one thing you do better than anyone else you know. Anybody? Just give me a head. Give me a uh-huh or snap if you got a snap, right? There you go. That's better. There are people in the room who are like, no, I had trouble picking just one thing. The one thing I do better than anyone else I know. See, the challenge is that we actually don't know what our strengths are. We just don't. And in fact, if you ask most people in the world what their strengths are, you know the first thing they'll give you? They'll give you their resume or their academic transcript. Here's where I worked, here's what I did. Here's where I worked, here's what I've learned. This is the papers, these are the degrees I have. But those aren't your strengths. See, knowledge, skill, and experience are things you add to your life. Your strengths, your talent, they're unique to you. But do you know what they are? But the reason why that third question ends up being so hard is because we aren't taught to focus on our strengths. We live in a zero-sum game, right? For you to say that you are better at something than somebody else you know, too many people tell me it's because, well, if I say I'm great at that, I'm saying they're not. Like the world's gonna run out of things that you're great at. It's okay. When it comes to you knowing do you know that? But you know what's funny is that people will complain to me about, when I ask that question, name the one thing you do better than anyone else you know. And I'm like, do you really understand it? They're like, well, no, like, how do I put it into words? And they struggle to articulate their own strength, but the challenge is they complain when their boss doesn't know that they're genius. We have an expectation of our team leaders, of our partners, of our friends, knowing exactly what we do well, but we can't clearly articulate our own strengths. How intentionally do you look at what you do with your life? But see, we come by this from a very honest place, if you think about it. Our education system is based on what's called deficit remediation. Find the deficit, fix it. Because the opposite of bad is good, right? Too many times, the opposite of bad is actually just the opposite of bad. But we come by this truly from an honest place. Because why? Because when Gallup asks parents around the world the following question, your child comes home with an A, 2 Bs, a C, and an F. Which grade deserves the most attention? What do 77% of American parents say? Exactly. The French love the F even more than we do. The French love the F to the tune of 87%. Okay, we got the Canadians at 83. Now, the question Gallup was asking wasn't, you can only talk about one grade. It was which grade deserves the most attention. But the F is what comes up around the world. So what's the right answer, though? The A, yes. But you know what, when I asked, I've literally shown this slide in probably 5 or 6 continents now at this point. This slide in particular. When I ask people, well, why is the A the right answer? You know the number one thing I hear? Well, because it's positive. And so we should focus on being positive, because that's gonna change everything. Really, did you know that being positive about what you're good at will never change the thing you suck at? Imagine the world's worst project manager. No one in this room, I'm sure. But imagine the world's worst project manager. And imagine that person is me. And so I work for Nate, and Nate comes in, and Nate's like, well, Mike said at Creative Mornings that we should focus on the A, somebody positive. So Nate comes to my desk, and he's like, wow, D, nobody staples quite like you. Your staple makes a perfect triangle. It's awesome. And I'm like, thanks, Nate. And every day he compliments my stapling. And suddenly one day, poof, I'm the world's greatest project manager. It's a lie, right? Because being positive about what you're good at won't change what you're bad at. So what's the point, though? How is the A? Because here's the deal. The key to changing the F is in the A. If you intentionally know your strengths and intentionally understand your own talent and how that impacts your life, you can navigate your worst moments with your best moments. I was in Colorado Springs a couple years ago teaching this very slide, and a woman during break came up to me, and she was very upset. That slide's garbage. I'm living this. My son just brought home a D. I was like, wow, imagine that. She's like, I said, how old? He's like, he's 13. I'm like, a 13-year-old son with a D. Shocking, right? Like, but she couldn't have a D. And so she's like, how am I supposed to strengths this? How am I supposed to be intentional about strengths? I said, well, let me eat my salsa and my tacos and we'll sit down. It was in the lunch line getting accosted. I'm like, okay. And we sat down and I said, talk to me. I said, why did your son get a D? She said, I went to the teacher. The teacher said he failed to turn in 15 homework assignments. I'm like, that'll get you a D, right? Like, that'll work. She's like, and no matter what, I said, so what have you done? She said, no matter what I do, I keep asking him every day this week on the drive to school, why didn't you turn in the homework? Why didn't you turn in the homework? What does the 13-year-old boy say? I don't know. Right? She's like, how do I focus on strength? And I said, here's the problem. You're asking the wrong question. She's like, what do you mean? I said, did he turn in any homework? She's like, yes, but just 5. He would have had barely enough to get a D. I said, why did he turn in the 5? Your son clearly has an allergy to homework. He practically breaks out into hives. What was the magic of this moment that these 5 assignments got done? See, we have to do situational archaeology, as I like to call it. What was the genius of those 5 people? I said, was he staying with you and not your crazy ex-husband? Were the 2 kids that bug him every day, were they not there? Was this a substitute teacher? Were they essay versus multiple choice? What, did he have extra time at 4 afterwards? Think about your own life right now. How intentionally do you run past your best moments in search of fixing your broken moments? Because you think, well, that's not important, it just happened. The first beat of all this today is strengths. How intentional are you about knowing what your strengths are? Because when you intentionally know, think of it. You're having a conversation with your partner. You're like, man, we don't want to have to talk about summer vacations or the holidays coming up eventually, where we're going to spend the holidays. Dear, have you ever had a talk that's gone well? Have you ever had a conversation? Okay, start from there. Where were you? Was there a bottle of wine involved? Was there extra time? Were you running out the door or not? Think of your best. If you don't know your best moments, you won't know how to navigate around them. You've got to understand that. And so when it comes to your strengths, you got to start from there. So the key of being intentional about your strengths is for navigation. But here's the other thing. What if you got a better investment of your life focusing on your strengths? One of the key pieces, Gallup wanted to find out if focusing on strengths impacted how well you learn. So the University of Kansas took a collection of students, and they gave them all a reading test, and they discovered 2 groups. Average readers read approximately 90 words a minute. They discovered above average readers read significantly higher. They read 350 words a minute. Without telling them who they were, they said, congratulations, you have won a free speed reading course. And they sent them off to a class to see if they could increase reading times, and they did. Average readers went from 90 words a minute to 150. By percentage, a pretty significant increase. Above average readers went from 350 to 2,900. They've run it over and over again, and the results are almost always the same. Why? Because when you send me to a class on how to be more organized, I go from being disorganized to consistently finding my phone and keys, okay? When you send people with like the StrengthsFinder talent of discipline to the exact same class, they go from being organized to being able to negotiate Middle East peace. The exact same information is addition to me, but multiplication to you. But are you trying to fix yourself? Look, everybody can read. See, this isn't about not being able to read. This is about what's the greatest return on your investment. Are you so intentional about your strengths that you're like, I know what classes I should take, but I also know what classes I should never take because it's just not going to be enough of a return. Strengths, you got to be intentional. Deliberately, so takeaway for intentionality, we need to deliberately focus on our strengths. They're going to be our key to growth and navigation. But the second one's more interesting. It's sacrifice. What does sacrifice have to do with anything? Sacrifice is about action. Sacrifice is about choices that you make. Are you intentional about how you're spending your money, your time? Are you selecting the people that you're hanging around with as much specificity as you select the way you invest in your business, you invest in your life? I used to have a mentor years ago named Frank Radford, and former Navy SEAL, and he would say things to me like, show me a person's friends and the things they read, and I will show you who they'll be in 5 years. There's something about how we spend our money and how we spend our time and how we spend our effort. Are you thinking about how you invest? And so when it comes to sacrifice, what does that mean? Do you have an idea of what matters to you so deeply that you're willing to say, I'm willing to forego spending money to have more money for something else? I'm willing to give up my time of something I want to do now for that item later. And so one of the things I'll say a lot when I talk is the fact that you actually don't know what your passions are if you don't know what they cost you. And by the way, sacrifice, the actual definition of sacrifice, is the giving up of something you want desperately for the belief in the belief of something greater. Giving up something you value. It's not useless. For the value of something greater. Do you know what that is? Do you have things in your life that you are so clearly focused on that you're like, it's worth my time. It's worth my money. It's worth a part of myself. I was in Afghanistan teaching StrengthsFinder a number of years ago. Very first time. We'd never done strengths. It's a crazy process because I have to have it translated into Dari, and I do a lot of work with students. I spent the early years just doing student work. I still do. I love Afghan students. And we were doing strengths, and I was so proud. I was going to do StrengthsFinder in Afghanistan. And it was a train wreck. It was horrible. And I was teaching strengths, and it just didn't go well. And I remember trying to get it cleared up, and the students weren't getting it. I was expecting about 20. I think I had 6. And, the students, they have a great relationship with me, but they teach me like a teacher, so it's very honorable. But it was a disaster. I'm teaching StrengthsFinder there, and it's just like you're trying to explain these big terms. And so as the talk is winding down, I'm realizing it's a train wreck. And so if you've ever been a speaker, you know that when worst comes to worst, you just cling to your greatest hits, okay? Which is follow your dreams, be passionate about, but the idiot doesn't realize he's saying this in a war zone, right? It's a different matter to say follow your dreams when you're in a conflict environment. But I was desperate. I just wanted out of the classroom, follow your dreams is all I had. They're like, thank you, teacher, this is great. And as they left, I was like, some flopped in my chair, trying to gather my stuff. One of the students came back in and was like, teacher, can I ask a question? I'm like, yes, of course you can. So glad you're here. He's like, that was a great talk. I'm like, thanks. He sits down and he says to me, teacher, I love what you said about dreams. But I have to ask you a question. I have a dream, and I have something I want to ask you. I'm like, sure, whatever you got. He said, teacher, my dream has always been to be a doctor. And I said, well, that's terrific. Being a doctor is a great thing. Awesome. He's like, no, but teacher, I need to know what to do because he said, I've taken the TOEFL test, which is the English equivalency, because all medical school training around the world is done in English. He said, I've taken the TOEFL test 2 or 3 times now, and I just can't pass it. I can't pass the test. Teacher, and he starts to get emotional. He says that no matter what I do, my scores are never good enough, but I want to be a doctor. He's like, and now my father and my brothers, they make fun of me at night. And they start to laugh, and they say, I've spent all this money on English classes, and he just can't pass the test. He's like, and now I lay in bed at night, and I am so sad my whole family sees it. He says, my father, he just says, I should pray. And I was like, we talk about prayer and God. It's part of their culture very deeply. I said, that's terrific, great. I think prayer matters. I think Allah cares about you. I said, maybe prayer's great, just trying to get out the door, right? And he says, no, teacher, you don't understand. He said, my father isn't telling me to pray that God will help me pass the test. My father is telling me that I should pray because only Allah is strong enough to kill my dream so that I will not be sad. Teacher, could you tell me how to kill my dream so I could stop being sad? Do you ever have those moments when you're like, I'm in the wrong room? Like somebody smarter should be here right now. But there's also this thing called inspiration and creativity. And I remember looking him in the face and going, one, do I lie to him or do I tell him the truth? I was like, you know what? You may never be able to be a doctor. I need to tell you that. You deserve that. But here's the thing. What is the dream at the core of this that you can hold on to? Could you be a nurse? Could you work in other areas? Could you work with the ambulance? Could you work in medicine somewhere else? I said, anybody can dream the first dream. It takes true courage and sacrifice to dream again. See, even a child dreams the first dream. Do you have something inside of you that you so intentionally hold on to that you're like, I'm willing to dream again and again and again and again? See, because that's what it's going to take. The clearest point for us when it comes to is how we're spending our money and our time. What are you spending your life on? Are you intentional about what it is that you're giving yourself away? And the last one is a little different. It's generosity. When you think about generosity, most people think about giving away time and money. But when it comes to generosity, it's all about how you connect your life to others. You give away money, and time, sure, but how do you connect to other people? See, most of us tie our ability to achieve our dreams and our goals based on our own resilience, based on how strong can I keep believing, how do I hold myself together? That will give out one day. What if you could tie your story into the story of others? This is Roberto Carlos. Roberto Carlos is a guide in Chile and Patagonia and tours Dauphinee. Roberto has been a guide for about 17 years now. Roberto started classes and then realized one day that he wasn't meant to be in a classroom. But you know what? All of his brothers and sisters were. So he went out into the national park and became a guide and put all of his siblings through university, as well as putting his sister through law school. And I thought he was just we ended up on a solo trek together through Patagonia in 2015, just the two of us. I barely spoke Spanish, he barely spoke English. And we walked together. And I thought, oh, isn't this great? But he was all about, he's like, Mike, this is what the planet looks like. And that glacier we hiked on, this is what's happening. He transformed my mind of how I saw things and transformed it again when one of my clients, we take clients to Patagonia now, one of my clients almost died on a trip from a pre-existing condition. And I needed somebody to literally save a client's life at 3 a.m. as we're racing out of a national park with no way in and out. And he knew exactly what to do. And suddenly I wanted to know more about this man. I wanted to know about his family and his life and his history. He is my brother now. So as a thank you for saving my life, we flew and hiked the road to Everest together because he always dreamed of going to Everest. I got to hike to Tengboche because he was like, I've always dreamed of being somewhere else. He changed the course of my life. He's my guide, though. These are two friends whose name I won't share, who worked the streets in exactly the way you think until they were in their 50s in Central America. And then one day decided they didn't want their grandchildren asking questions about what they did for a living. Their grandchildren. And we had mutual friends. One friend led me to the other, and they said, hey, why don't we do Strengths Finder with them? And I remember sitting down, and no lie, she says to me, and you'll appreciate this if you've taken the Strengths Finder, she's like, I didn't know it was called woo. She literally said it to me. I'm like, that's not really what it means. I'm like, but she sat there saying, so do you think that once I found a story I was proud of, I wanted to share the story of helping others be proud of their story as well? Is that why I have communication as a talent? I was like, and she's like, I like your questions. She said, they make me feel more human. And I said, well, thank you. And we were leaving, and I went in the alley and sobbed. Because my view of people who have to sell themselves to survive and make choices some of us wouldn't make is different because of people like them. And this is my client in Afghanistan. This is my client in Afghanistan taking selfies with the Taliban 1 month ago when we were in Afghanistan. Because, unbeknownst to anybody else, they had worked together to create the very first ceasefire in the Afghan army history ever. And the president was like, if we offer it, will they stick by it for 3 days over Eid? And they did. No one believed what happened. People who hadn't been home since the war started poured into Kabul. If you go online and Google selfies with the Taliban, literally soldiers on both sides for 3 days, weeping, hugging each other, and singing in the streets. And that's the minister. One of the people I advise, one of the people my team advises. See, you want a story that's extraordinary, that's transformative? You've got to connect your lives to others. You've got to find a way to tie your story into the story of other people with intention. Who are you focusing on? Who are you seeing? Who are you engaging? Because that's the surest way to really live a life that you dream of, by living a life of intentional relationships. If you ever follow me on social media, you'll see this is a tag that drives everything I do. Follow the relationship. Follow the relationship when you don't know what to do. Follow the relationship when you're worried about how to spend your money. Follow the relationship when you're trying to figure out how to kind of navigate the most difficult moments of your life. Because if you've done it with intention, you're gonna find strength in those relationships. The resilience to an extraordinary life is found in the bonds of generosity. As you think about, how well do you know your strengths? How clearly do you have a value, an image, or a plan in your life that you're worth sacrificing for? How much are you bringing your story into the story of others? It matters. And I want to wrap up with one last thing before we go to Q&A. I was on a plane a number of years ago, coming back on KLM from Portugal, and I was reading, KLM magazine is my favorite, and every February actually, they do a tribute to all things travel, and they had asked people to submit their very best travel experiences. And they had to be all true stories, and the winners were given flying blue miles or something, and they were great stories. I love to travel. And the winning story was actually in this Dutch magazine from a guy in Tucson, Arizona, named Dominic, who wrote in to say that his very best travel experience was a surf weekend he and a friend from work took down in Mexico. And he said they had only 3 days, and so they had packed the surfboards and camping gear the night before. And as soon as work was over and the office closed, they took turns driving all night through the mountains of Mexico trying to get to the coast. He said, but even as they took turns driving, as the sun was coming up, they hadn't quite made it. So they thought, should we pull over for breakfast? It was really early in the morning, like around 7. They were like, should we pull over? Few things are better than breakfast on a road trip. So he said we pulled over in this tiny little Mexican town in front of the first restaurant we could find with the door open and a giant Coca-Cola sign on the pole out front. He said we walked in, and in his best high school Spanish, he said, huevos and toast, por favor. He said the food was amazing. It came out quick. The coffee never got less than half empty. The cook would stand in the door, and whatever the waitress needed, he'd run and grab it. He said it was great. We didn't even rush. We sat there, they said, for almost an hour, smoking cigarettes and hanging out. But the sun was getting higher. He knew they wanted to get on, so he went to the waitress who was wiping on the counter, and he said, in his high school Spanish, como mucho dinero. Not even like La Cuenta. Como mucho dinero. And she was like, no. He tried again, como mucho dinero. No. Finally giving up on Spanish altogether, in English, he says to her, ma'am, how much do we owe you? We have pesos. We want to pay. You're a restaurant. What's the bill? At which point back, he heard her say, no, sir, not restaurant. At that moment, he stepped outside and realized there was a giant red Coca-Cola sign on every pole in town. They had pulled up in front of a private home, had sat down and ordered breakfast. The woman was not the waitress, but the wife of the man wanting to know who the two gringos were at his breakfast table. The hero of that story, the husband and wife, when you leave this place, here's the question. The husband and wife, our heroes, the hero always knows who they are, even if the world doesn't. The hero always knows who they are, even if the world doesn't. How clearly do you know who you are? Are you intentionally looking at your strengths? Are you intentionally sacrificing? Are you intentionally living your life in relationship? You guys have been great. Thanks so much for having me. We're going to do some Q&A in the time we've got here. Hope you enjoyed Creative Mornings.